What was the most legendary thing a student did at school? Piano in the middle of the theater stage. Unattended high school seniors wandering around during study hall. One of the students sits down and starts banging on the keys and screaming random lyrics. The rest of us are sitting in the seats. While he's banging away, the side stage door opens and the principal is standing there, obviously had heard the ruckus and came to investigate. The student on the piano has their back to the principal and doesn't notice. We are rolling with laughter as he continues to make up ridiculous lyrics and mash the keys, unaware. He stops to admire his fans and the principal clears her throat. He turns around to see her. He slowly turns back to the piano, closes the rack over the keys, expression unchanged. He calmly gets up and walks to the stage door opposite of the principal and exits the stage. Minutes go by as we are dying with laughter and the principal is still just standing there assessing. Then, the same student appears in the sound booth behind us having gone onto the stage, now wearing a woman's dress and wig that he had found in the changing rooms. He throws open the window and shouts down, "Miss Thompson." I heard a ruckus and came running to see what was afoot. The principal just laughed and exited stage right. We only had like a week left and she didn't care. Maybe not legendary, but an interesting and funny experiment. There were 3 high schools in my hometown. 2 of them, both named after famous historical figures of said town, were in a sort of rivalry with each other. Nothing serious, but the students would casually trash talk the other school a lot. Mostly in good fun. Each school had a display case with a bust of their respective historical namesakes somewhere in the building. They were just some decoration, object that you would pass by every single day and pay little attention to. So we figured we'd test how little attention people actually pay these things. So one night, a few buddies of mine and I got together. Most of us were from my school, but we had a few inside men from the other one as well. We split up into 2 teams, got access to both buildings simultaneously, picked open the very cheap locks on the display cases, grabbed the busts and switched them. Keep in mind, these schools were not that close to one another, and none of us had been old enough to drive at that point, so we had to carry these Fing limestone busts through half the town. We then locked the bus into the display cases again and left. We had managed completely non-destructive entry to both schools, so nobody ever found out. It took almost an entire school year for anyone to notice. To this day, no teacher has ever found out who was responsible. But no damage was done, so they didn't try too hard to figure it out. A few years after I graduated, the school was preparing to take their assessment tests, which rate the schools. Many people think these tests are a waste of time, but they're important to school administrators. So, the principal orders that some classes are interrupted, in order to make sure that all the kids have refreshers in some basic math and writing skills. A few kids in a U.S. history honors class were angry. They resented the interruption, as the classes were preparing them for an independent AP exam that awarded college credit. In response, they decided to intentionally sabotage the assessment tests. Our school was in an upper-middle-class area, and regularly scored in low 90s, the top 10%. Then, suddenly, the school scored in the mid-low 80s. Turns out that 15-20 students out of 300 turning in absolute zeros can impact an average score. School administrators went berserk. Stories were circulated. Students were threatened. But nothing came of it. The students never confessed. The tests were anonymous. The school rules didn't forbid poor performance. It helped that the students were led by kids whose parents were well trained in protesting during the 1960s. Was a great scene. I've shared this story before, but it's probably one of my favorite memories of high school. Halloween costumes were banned at my high school because of some idiots like 10 years before that dressed up and used it as an excuse to hide their face while they vandalized the school. My senior year, more than half of the class decided that we would still dress up and march into the school together in the morning. We all knew we would be punished right away, but it didn't matter. I stayed up all night making a suit of armor out of metallic duct tape and cardboard, along with a broomstick horse to ride. Here is a picture of me that ended up in the yearbook. The next day we all gathered in the parking and waited for everyone to show up. People went all out and there were a lot of amazing costumes, and after about 20 minutes of waiting we started our march in. The deans had learned of our plan and were waiting for us right as we entered. They started pulling people aside in groups and taking student IDs to hand out detentions. In my group there was one guy dressed up as an ATM, and when the dean asked for his ID he started making ATM noises and then slipped the ID out through the slot where you would put your debit card in. It was one of the funniest things, and I was so jealous that my costume was not as clever as his. Even though having so many of us participate was pretty awesome, his costume just made that whole event for me. For senior prank, a group of kids dressed up in all black with masks. They ran down the main hall of the school with industrial buckets of cheap vegetable oil, pouring it everywhere. I mean everywhere, right before the bell rang for passing period. Kids were slipping and falling all over the place, spreading the oil even further throughout the school. It was so bad they ended up sending everyone home so they could clean up the mess. The school did an investigation, pulling camera footage from campus and interviewing students. Of course the kids were bragging to friends about their accomplishment, so the suspects were pulled into the office. They didn't even need to interrogate them, they knew they all did it. How? They were all wearing the exact same shoes when they pulled it off. They were suspended for 5 days. School was pretty cool with the whole thing. I went to high school in the early '70s. Our city had just implemented the desegregation of the high schools by closing the only black high school and busing those kids all over the city to the white high schools. Racial tensions were pretty high at my school. Many of the white kids resented having to go to school with black kids, and the black kids were understandably upset at being yanked out of their own high school and bused. It was lunchtime in the cafeteria. I was sitting at the next table over from where a white guy was sitting. I see a black guy working up to the white kid. He stops in front of the white kid and say, "Hey, honky." The white guy says, "Hey, N." The whole room got real quiet. I could see kids looking around, trying to decide what to do and where to run or hide, the expectation being that there was about to be a fight. Then both the black guy and white guy bust out laughing and hug each other. The black guy sits down and they eat lunch together. People looked so confused as they couldn't comprehend what just happened. It turns out both guys were in drama class together and had decided to troll everyone. Not one student, but all seniors. It was customary at our school that on a hot day near the end of the year, seniors would start a water balloon fight. It was usually quite small and the teachers were used to it, so they could put a stop to it quickly. Not this time though. We had been dropping hints here and there for several days, weeks beforehand, talking about it in hallways, within earshot of teachers. Leaving behind empty balloons, etc. The day before the actual attack, after school hours, we brought thousands of balloons to the school and a good 10-20 people started filling them at water fountains and in the toilets. We kept them in big buckets filled with water so the balloons wouldn't burst and hid them in the bushes around the school. The day of the attack, we had some mock maneuvers. Groups of people would suddenly start running towards the school entrance, the toilets, the principal office. Teachers would be running to stop us, only for nothing to happen. Then came the actual attack. Everyone suddenly ran into the bushes, grabbed the buckets and started unleashing hell on the other kids. The teachers closed in, trying to destroy our balloons, but there were just so many, they couldn't get rid of them. Everyone was soaking wet after. The most legendary thing, though, wasn't the number of balloons or the planning of the attack, it was the fact that each and every senior participated in that. Buying balloons, bringing buckets, filling balloons, etc. Everyone did something. Despite all the high school drama, we managed to all come together for this epic prank. School just decided to give everyone iPads after a few years of letting physics class use them as their textbooks. At lunch everyone turned on AirDrop to share memes, which they weren't supposed to do. However, the teachers let it slide and figure it isn't worth punishing since everyone does it and nothing super inappropriate has been found yet. Drugs, porn, etc. One kid in my younger sibling's class airdropped a meme about being the principal that wasn't inappropriate and used a photo of him when he was a math teacher earlier in his career. He found it on some archived page on the internet. From what I recall, the text used was more looking for laughs about how he used to teach math and now is the principal. Basically just some dumb thing that staff would have laughed off after telling him not to use school staff in airdrop memes. The kid who did this had never acted out in school. The worst he probably did was forget an assignment or two. He got detention for a whole week. The principal has a complex. No other student has gotten in as much trouble for airdropping things at the school. Edit: I found a spelling error. Also, I didn't expect to get more than 15 upvotes. Glad you guys are entertained.